Good afternoon, class. I am Zane Roper, and the next period of instruction will be on the correlation with violence in video games and how it affects adults and children. So why are video games synonymous with violence? Most video games nowadays have vivid depictions of violence due to our increase in technology and our ability to have enhanced graphics to include more blood and gore within video games. Also the children or adults that play these games could possibly imitate what the main character is in the game. They can imitate their actions. There's also a minor level of violence is the argument that goes between console owners and also the PC owners on what platform is the better platform. This has caused arguments, but it's not a very direct correlation with violence. So some of the examples of where video games were connected to violent acts: the Columbine school shooting, where Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold killed 13 people and injured 23 in the school shooting. The accusations after the investigation started after this attack was that these both kids were heavily influenced by playing violent video games. Eric Harris in particular was stated that even up to a year before committing this attack, that he altered his own video game that was already violent and made his own customizations to where the opposing team was not capable of fighting back, so he was able to plan out any attacks that he wanted during the game. Another game that brought up a lot of controversy because of violence is a game called Manhunt, created by the development team Rockstar. Rockstar is also the developing team that created Grand Theft Auto, which is another highly controversial game because of its violence and sexual content within the game. The Manhunt is an example of a video game that has a direct correlation and representation of violence, because Manhunt's depiction within the game, you play as third-person view, which is just over the shoulder of whatever character you're controlling, and your sole purpose in the game is to kill your victims in the most violent way possible, and that's how you gain points. So that is why Manhunt was taken off the shelves in all stores, and also was banned in many countries. Manhunt was accused of influencing a 17-year-old that killed a 14-year-old in a park. After luring the 14-year-old to the park, the 17-year-old then killed him with a hammer and a knife, which is exactly what is used within the game Manhunt. It was also said that the 17-year-old was heavily addicted to this game as well. Rockstar has also developed Manhunt 2 that incorporated the exact level of violence, but since our graphical capabilities have increased, there was more blood and gore, and so since the controversies came up about the game, the developing team had to move the cameras away from the violent acts to keep them off screen. However, any characters that truly wanted to keep this content within the game solely just went into the game's files and brought the camera angle back down to where the character is actually committing the murder. Another game that was developed recently is called Hatred. This is one of the few games that has received an adults only rating on the ESRB rating scale. Adults only is strictly for 17 years and older individuals, and they gained this rating solely because of extreme violent content and graphical content, and also most of the adult only games are rated that because of their sexual content. Many of the adult games are not actually rated AO because of their violence. However, Hatred distinctly shows the perspective of a psychopath going on a killing spree within his own town. And again, just like Manhunt, your sole objective is to kill the residents of his city in any way possible that you deem fit. Because this game is so graphically advanced, and because of its blood and gore, it was banned from the video game streaming site Twitch, and it was also banned in many countries because of its content. So what was the common similarities between these different games and the events correlated with the games? Each game was strictly based on violence, and the three different teams were all accused of committing their violent crimes because of video games. All three of the video games had, because of the improvement in graphical capabilities, all showed the violence in a way that created a desensitization between each of the individuals, and all of the games gave scenarios within each of them of how to kill someone within a real life scenario, which could have further influenced the individual's actions. So what is desensitization? Desensitization is the attenuation or elimination of cognitive, emotional, and ultimately behavioral responses to a stimulus. So basically what this is saying is that after being exposed to violence for so long, we become desensitized in the sense that we are no longer affected by witnessing a violent act in real life. Which not only video games are at fault for desensitization, but also violent media within new movies and TV shows that have come out that also depict violent acts. We have, as a whole, not only as people who play video games, but we as a whole have become desensitized to a lot of violence. So based off of these examples, you probably assume that there is a direct correlation between video games and violence. However, this is not exactly the case. A lot of these situations are strictly isolated events, and that there is no way to strictly correlate the video game that this person may have been playing and their acts. These people could have been mentally ill in the first place, and the video games could not actually have been incorporated in their actions. So a comparison that was made using the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the Entertainment Software Association in the years of 1996 to 2004. On the scale depicted, there is a depiction showing the bar scale is the showing of violent crimes that have been committed since 96 to 2004, and the line scale is a depiction showing the overall sales of violent video games. Now, since based solely off of the graphic, you can make the assumption that people who are video game players are maybe too busy to go out and commit these violent crimes, or that these video games are allowing these people to have a release of aggression by using the video games. And according to the chart, it's about a 1 in 400 chance that someone who plays a video game would also be a violent criminal. So who is responsible for monitoring the person playing these video games so that there is not a violent act committed? To start with the parents. Parents need to know their child's maturity if it is a child playing these violent games. It's also important for the parent to monitor what it is that is the video game depicting, so that they can accurately judge whether or not their child should be playing this game. The consumer themselves, whether it be a child or an adult, should the child may not have as good of a grasp on this situation as where the parents come in, but for an adult, the adult should know their tolerance to violence, whether they are good at coping with what is depicted on a screen, and they should know how much violence is too much, meaning that what is the limit that you are willing to watch a violent act being committed, since essentially that is what these video games are doing. It's just depicting violence to you. Some of the problems that are brought up between these two groups that should be monitored is that the ability to accurately assess an individual's own maturity level. Most of the time people judge that they are more mature than they actually are, and also the parents' ability to accurately judge their child's own maturity level. Since they are not within their child's mind, they're not able actually to understand how mature their child may actually be. So on the side of the government should be regulating the sale of violent video games. There should be, and also the government should strictly enforce the ESRB rating scale, which I'll go into in a little bit. This is essentially the ratings of each individual game. Most games are still, whether it be rated M for mature, which is 17 years or older, or whether it be a teen rated game, which is 13 years or older. Most of the time there is no way to lawfully enforce an individual who may be 14 going and buying a game that is rated mature, which they should not be able to. This is where the government should be enforcing this rating scale. And then some of the problems that are brought up from this is that the government has no capability of stopping free speech, since that is one of our Bill of Rights. And then on the other side is the video game developers. The developers should decrease the amount of violence that is depicted in games. There should be a level of violence that developers are not able to actually show, similar to Hatred and Manhunt, where you're able to take real life scenarios and play as a character killing people in those scenarios. However, the problem brought up because of this is is free speech impeachment. Just like the government is not able to stop these developers' free speech of being able to create whatever game that they seem fit, the developers are going to utilize this free speech in order to keep creating their games. So what can a parent do to help a child not be desensitized to this violence and just simply not playing these violent games? A parent should be able to accurately relate to their children what it is that is in the video game, what violence is, what they should not be doing. It sounds very simple, but a lot of parents do not actually take the time to sit down with their children and talk about the game that they are trying to play because of the violence within it. And instead of allowing your child to have a violent game that is rated M for mature, the parent should substitute that game with an educational game, or they could discuss the concerns with other parents in order to bring it up and become recognized by the government that violent video games may be causing a problem within their own children. And then you should be able to understand, the risks that you are putting your child at. If you do believe that violent video games are a catalyst, if you will, for violence, the parent should be able to understand that their child should not be playing a violent video game. Now, the ESRB rating scale, this is a standard that was put in place for every game to be rated. And this rating scale is usually not strictly enforced, both in shops that you have to go into to buy games and also online. It's worse online because you can easily put in a fake date of birth and be able, even if you're say 14 or 15, be able to get access to a game that is rated adults only or mature. The different levels, for the most part, early childhood, E for everyone, E10 plus for anyone 10 years or older, and T for teens, which is 13 years or older. These games typically do not have any violence depicted in them, and are usually either like very playful or very educational for the younger audience. The M for mature for 17 and up, and adults only for 18 and up. This is where knowing your own maturity is going to come into play, because games such as Call of Duty, Battlefield, where there is a lot of violence being depicted because you are an individual killing other individuals within the game, you should be able to understand or try to understand your own maturity, and also be able to determine if you're able to handle that kind of violence. The adults only gaming community is extremely low, and like I said earlier, most of them are rated that because they have more sexual content than violent content. There's only 2 games out of the, I think, 5 games that are rated adults only that actually are rated that because of their violence. And then RP is just a rating of a game that hasn't yet came out, so they haven't accurately determined the rating of it. Do I have any questions at this time? No? And then here are a list of references. That concludes my class. Thank you.